نحمده ونصلي على رسول الكريم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. And welcome again to Sira Khatam Nabiyyin, in which we are on a journey ourselves, the journey to recognize, appreciate, like, love our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. For those of you who've had opportunity to watch the last episode, you'll know that we have now embarked on our adventure. We've embarked on our aim, which is to hopefully present to the viewers and the listeners the story, the biography rather, of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Prior to actually sort of bringing the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on the scene, we had to build the scene, and the building the scene involved talking about the groups of people who lived in that area prior to the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yemen in particular is getting mentioned again and again. Concept of Arabs, who were the Arab tribes, has been discussed as well. And I left you last week, if you recall, reciting to you a number of ayats from Surah Saba, in which I mentioned أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لقد كان لسبأ في مسكنهم آية جنتان عن يمين وشمال كلوا من رزق ربكم واشكروا له بلدة طيبة ورب غفور فأعرضوا فأرسلنا عليهم سيل العرم وبدلناهم بجنتيهم جنتين ذواتي أكل خمط وأثل وشيء من سدر قليل ذلك جزيناهم بما كفروا وهل نجازي إلا الكفور وجعلنا بينهم وبين القرى التي باركنا فيها قرا ظاهرة وقدرنا فيها السير سيروا فيها ليالي وأياما آمنين فقالوا ربنا باعث بين أسفارنا وظلموا أنفسهم فجعلناهم أحاديث ومزقناهم كل ممزق إن في ذلك لآيات لكل صبار شكور. These were the verses that I recited to you, if you recall, in Surah Saba, ayats 15 to 19. And we'll mention them again in terms of the English near enough translation. So in Saba, the place, there's indeed a sign in their maskanihim, in their dwelling places. 2 gardens on the right and 2 gardens on the left. Eat from the rizq, the bounty, the sustenance from your Rabb, and give him thanks, acknowledge him, praise him. A blessed place, baldatan tayyiba, blessed place, fertile land, producing, safe place, everything you'd want in a country, and anything you'd want in a place, and a forgiving Rabb. However, fa'aradu, they turned away. So what did we sent down upon them on the flood, you could say, of Arim. And when the flood came, obviously water is a perfect and it's an absolute necessity for fertile land, but in excess it's a killer. In excess, instead of bringing more growth to these lands, instead of giving more sustenance, what it did was it actually destroyed everything in its way. What did it leave? Well, it left those kind of plants and trees which can survive under any circumstances. And they tend to be things which people and animals don't like to eat. What are we talking about? We're talking about bitter fruits. We're talking about tamarisks. And we're talking about the odd lot tree here and there. And this is why did Allah SWT do this? He said, thus, in this way we punish them because they disbelieved. And is it not the disbelievers alone that we punish? Rhetorical question. And we placed between them and the villages that we had blessed other settlements easily seen, so that they could, the space of a journey between the two of them. And they said to them, travel in them safely by day and night. So it was still within sight. So the people could see and use that as an ayah, as we've already mentioned, that look, they had everything. They had literally the world at their feet. They had crops, they had fertility in the land, they had safety. People would come from far and wide to trade with them because they were quite affluent. With that they had power. With power they had armies and strength and strong buildings and better facilities for the humans residing there. They had animals, they had everything that a person would require from this world. But instead of acknowledging the favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they decided another path. So within the sight of these people, they could see that, look, if we also adopt that path, then that's also going to be our conclusion. And that's the ayah. And we also mentioned, if you recall in the earlier episodes, that the miracle of Allah, the miracle rather of the Prophet ﷺ is the Quran. And we mention this as a fadila, as an excellence of the Prophet of Allah ﷺ, by saying that his miracle outlived everybody else's miracle, and his miracle is the only way that we got to become aware and understand the miracles of the other Anbiya. But not only that, the one thing that, if you remember, I mentioned was that all the other miracles were finite. They were in terms of time and in terms of place. But the Quran, in its remarkable nature, has recorded those even at a time when recording was exceptionally poor. You know, there was people were not recording anything. It was hardly, you know, there was hardly bits and bobs here and there, fragments of things, but not something the size of the Quran. And then to safeguard it in terms of its absolute purity, in terms of its, that not even a dot has changed, not a letter has changed. This is beyond remarkable. It's miraculous. That's the word you would use to describe it. And that's what the Quran is. It's a miracle. There's no other way to describe it. So it becomes an ayat for the people who were living around Sabah when this the flood of Arim took place. But also it was a sign for us who are now reading it, you know, 1400 or so years after, and even though the event obviously didn't take place at the time of the Prophet of Allah ﷺ, but the Prophet of Allah ﷺ was informed of it through revelation, we can also now take lesson from it. So a sign is beneficial when people continue to benefit from it. So if there was a fire exit sign here in the studio, and I could see it, and God forbid if I needed to use it, then I would know that, oh, there's a sign, there's a fire exit. But once it gets torn or tattered, or once it's no longer there, or somebody paints over it, then that sign can be there forever. I can't see it no more, so I can't benefit from it. So in the same way, because this sign has been preserved, because the sign is within the Quran, I can, and you, and anybody else for that matter, can continue to benefit from the signs that were left for people in the past. So what did they say? They said, Ya Allah, extend the distance between our travel stops. We don't want to travel easily between these places. So they brought harm upon themselves. And we made of them tales to be told. So basically they became news and tales of parents telling their children. In there are signs for all those who are truly patient and truly grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Sabah, we've got this mentioned. So we have here that Muhammad ibn Ishaq and other experts in ancestries and genealogy say that Sabah was Abdul Shams ibn Yashjub ibn Ya'rab ibn Qahtan. And if you recall, obviously, Qahtan was a name that we mentioned to you in the last episode as well. They say, why did he get this name Sabah for? He said, because he was the first of the Arabs who Sabah. And what is Sabah? Sabah here obviously means that he took captives. He was the first of the Arabs who started to take captives in battles, in wars. Whereas before, either they were let free or they were killed. So this was given to him. He had also another title, which was Ra'ish, which means a person who's in philanthropy, and because he used to give people his own wealth. So this was the title that he got from this particular activity. Imam Ahmad mentions a narration, and it says that Abdullah ibn Hubayra as-Sabai mentions from Abdurrahman ibn Wa'la that he heard Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, that a man once asked the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam who or what Sabah was. And what does it signify? Was it a man? Was it a woman? Was it a territory, a piece of land? What was it? So the Prophet of Allah replied, he says, certainly he was a man who had 10 children. 6 of them dwelled in Yemen and 4 in Syria, or what's referred to as Sham. Those in Yemen were Madhij, Kinda, Al-Azd, the Ash'aris, and Anmar, and Himyar. All were Arabs, and in Syria there were Lakham, Judham, Amila, and Ghassan. So these have been mentioned that this was an actual individual, that the Sabah that's being referred to. So Sabah includes all these tribes, because obviously from these 10 men, they then had their own families, and that's how tribes originally started. Obviously from men, from individuals who then set up their own families, basically. And there used to be kings who used to live in Yemen, and the title that used to be given to a king in Yemen was Tubba, and or Tababi'a, if we take the plural, and they would reign, and there were different titles given to different localities or different territories. So Persians, the kings were called Khosrows, and these were the various titles given. So Tubba was given not just to that individual who ruled over Yemen, but also Shahr and Hadramaut. Qaisar used to be whoever ruled over Syria and the peninsula, so that was Qaisar. Kisra, to those who ruled over Persia. Far'un, or Fir'aun as we have as well, to the Egypt, which is a plural, to the Egyptian rulers. Najashi, to those leaders over Abyssinia. And Batlemus, to those who ruled over India. So we have obviously these individuals who, because of their area, nowadays, we don't have that many difference in terms of, it depends if it's a monarchy. If it's a monarchy, then we have a king, we can have a president like we have in the USA, we can have a prime minister like we have in the UK. So these tend to be the 3-4 main titles that we have now. We don't tend to have different titles, or maybe emperor, things of that nature. Where we have certain titles specifically for certain groups of people. That was because it was a world before globalization. And a world before globalization meant that people practiced their own way of governing. They practiced their own way of ruling. They practiced their own methodologies. But with globalization and with arguably the strength of the Western approach, the Western sort of democratic approach and the Western sort of modus in terms of its political setup, seems to now have an impact across much of the world. You've got communism left in places. You've got obviously most places democratic. You've got tyrannies or tyrant setup where there is no form of election and no form of leadership. There are a couple of theocracies. So these tend to be now the main way that people lead. But back in the day, people had a lot more individuality. Nowadays, if you sit in a meeting, you'll find people will be sat with suits on and ties around a big table and with chairs. Whereas go back, 100, 150, 200 years, and you'll see people in different attire. The Japanese would probably be sat on the floor, a table just a foot or so raised off the ground in their sort of traditional dress. You'd see Afghans sat around in a circle, probably in a tent or something. So you saw different methods of governorship and different methods of reaching conclusions. But with globalization, all individuality has gone. We're all much of the same now, to be honest. And that's exactly why these kings with these different titles are mentioned. We had also a lady, Balqis. And Balqis, if you remember, is mentioned also in the Quran. She eventually marries Sulaiman alayhi salatu wasalam, and she was referred to as the Queen of Sheba. And she was of the Himyarite rulers of Yemen. And so that her story also comes through into the Quran. And the Yemen was a remarkable place. It was absolute, basically fruit everywhere, abundancy, prosperous country, plenitude, and they had nothing much to be concerned about. And they lived, with decent approach. But then obviously when they disbelieved, when they left the path, they abandoned their practices of obedience, when they abandoned their practice of guidance, then they moved away. And as a result, as we saw in those ayats from Surah Sabah that I mentioned to you, ayats 15 to 19, due to their change, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also changed with them. It is mentioned that Allah knows best, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent, this is narrated from Wahb ibn Munabbih, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent around 13 prophets to Yemen in order to bring them closer. Muhammad ibn Ishaq narrates this. So you can see here that there was some effort to bring them to this way. We see, for instance, that where have we got this view that the people left the path? Well, I narrated to you, and I'll just remind you again that we saw ayats 16 and 17 mention that quite categorically rather. فَأَعْرَضُوا فَأَرْسَلْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ سَيْلَ الْعَرِمِ وَبَدَّلْنَاهُمْ بِجَنَّتَيْهِمْ جَنَّتَيْنِ ذَوَاتَيْ أُكُلٍ خَمْطٍ وَأَثْلٍ وَشَيْءٍ مِّن سِدْرٍ قَلِيلٍ ذَلِكَ جَزَيْنَاهُمْ بِمَا كَفَرُوا وَهَلْ نُجَازِي إِلَّا الْكَفُورِ. So here you can see quite clearly that the people of Sabah, the people who resided in Yemen, had moved away from what they were supposed to do. So where was this dam? Where did it exist? We have that this dam was constructed where waters were flowing between two mountains, and that was in days gone by. Nowadays, even nowadays, you'll find that dams are normally built in places where it's easy to sort of block the flow of water, which is tending to come from a higher position to a lower position. But what you do is you contain it at a higher position, and then you can control the water flow. Basically, you can preserve it in a huge reservoir, because that's what a dam is, but also you can then control it, put your pipe work in place, and provide that water, the services, to a large area. Nowadays, obviously, we can use the flow of water to make electricity, because of the using the flow of water, kinetic energy, which is then transferred to electrical energy as it passes over certain turbines and things of that nature, which can then be used also for electricity purposes. So not only is it a supply of preserving, it's a preserved supply of water, it's also generating electricity. And obviously, the main reason why we're holding water is so that we can drink water from our taps, we can bathe, we can provide water for our animals, and obviously our crops. And that's the aim, obviously, of a dam. And this was a very strong dam that was built. And it is said that Sabah ibn Ya'rib built it, and that it was fed by 70 valleys with 30 outlets from the water. So you can see that, it was quite a sizable dam, because if 70 valleys worth of water is gathering in there, that would be a lot of water. And in days gone by, it was water which determined fertility. Well, even now, we can't live anywhere. We've now conquered Earth. We reside. Humans reside in every corner of the Earth. Anywhere there's possible. We reside in places where it's not even possible to live. We live in the Arctic Circle or in the Antarctica Circle, where temperatures are dropping to ridiculous levels, and we can survive. Likewise, we're living in the most hottest of climates. Dubai has turned from a desert into a haven where anybody can live there. And what's changed is water. People might say yes, the oil, but it's the water. But the oil is just the finances to get the oil. That's what the key point is the water. And if you see now that we've conquered Earth, we're sending exploratory shuttles and rockets and machinery and equipment to various planets, whether it's the moon, Mars, or anywhere else for that matter. And what are we looking for? We're looking for water. We're always looking for water. Why? Because if we can find water somewhere, then there's always a possibility for life. And there's a possibility for residing there, because there's going to be no way of shipping tons and tons of water from Earth and getting it across there, because we'll always need a steady supply. Yes, getting a certain amount of water across there initially and living off that for a few weeks or months or years, that's fine. But then eventually it's gonna run out. We need a continuous supply. And that's really what a dam does. A dam is holding water, and it's a continuous supply of water. Once you have water, you got everything else. And don't need to go too far. If we recall even Zamzam water, when Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, and I know I'm jumping the gun here a little bit, but when Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam took his wife and his son to Mecca, at that time it was no longer, it was desolate, it was no longer inhabited. And when Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam was placed on the ground, and his mother ran between Safa and Marwa, we noticed that with his efforts and the angel, water came out. Once water was established, then people started to live there. So water is key. And it was about, the reports say, is a farsakh. And a farsakh, 1 farsakh long and 1 farsakh wide. And a farsakh is an ancient term of length, and it's about 3.5 miles. So that's quite a sizable dam. 3.5 miles is a huge dam. Okay, if it's 3.5 miles wide and 3.5 miles long, you can imagine, and it's obviously high up on the mountains, so you can see the valley is going to be a lot lower, so you're going to hold a lot of water there. Okay, even if we take, and my famous glass of water, which I use literally to give you an example of everything, but if you've got this glass of water here, try not to break my tablet, but if you've got a glass of water here, then you can see that its width is, about 5 centimeters. And it's obviously, because it's a circle, obviously the diameter is also going to be 5 centimeters along that way. But look how much water it's holding, because it's the depth which eventually holds the water. Now you're talking 3.5 miles by 3.5 miles. That's a huge amount of water that could be held there. And because of this huge amount of water that could be held there, people lived very, very well. It's mentioned by Qatada and others, just to exemplify this, that the orchards used to give so much fruit that a woman could put a basket on top of her head and just walk through, and when she reached the other side, there'd be enough fruit inside the basket without her having to pick it off the tree. So you can imagine how big these orchards were, because you can sit under a tree for a long time, unless obviously you're Isaac Newton and an apple falls in your head, but you can sit under a tree for a long time before a piece of fruit will fall. But if you had a huge orchard and you're walking literally from one side to the other side, then the probability obviously increases because the number of trees are increasing. So this is huge. But it goes further, you see. It wasn't just, it wasn't just water there, but it was also protected. It was protected because what we found was there were no fleas or any dangerous beasts there. So the fruit didn't go off. There wasn't any kind of disease which spread from fruit to fruit or from animal to animal. So everything was good. It was absolute greatness in there, and we've already elaborated that with respect to the verses that we've recited to you when it mentions that kulu min rizqi rabbikum washkuru lahu baldatun tayyibah wa rabbun ghafur, that eat from the rizq, eat from the sustenance, and be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah has given you much. It is a very fertile, wholesome, producing earth, and your Lord is, your Rabb is forgiving. But what happens is that, instead of, when man gets too kind of carried away in what he's capable of doing, and, we're guilty of that now in the era we live in, because now it's an era of technology. And when we can, produce things like this, when, I'm of a generation where mobile phones didn't exist. In fact, when I was growing up, there was only 2 or 3 houses in our street that had a landline, for crying out loud, where you had to sort of circle the phone down and hope that your finger didn't get trapped in the phone. There was only 2 or 3 houses rather, on our street that had that kind of phone. So phones themselves were unheard of, As I tell my students nowadays, when you wanted to ring Pakistan, India or Bangladesh, you didn't actually pick a phone up or go get a card. You'd actually get a cassette, TDK, place it in your cassette player, press record, and then get the family around and record the message. And once this was recorded, you didn't then send it by post. You'd put it and wait for somebody to go to Pakistan, India or Bangladesh. And when somebody was going, you poor chap, you hoarded him and handed over your cassette player, and then he put it in, and then he would travel or she would travel, and when they would reach whatever it is you were sending your message, and they would listen to it, they would reply back sort of like 6 months later. So anything could have happened in the time frame in between. You could have probably died by the time you received the message back. And now, now you could be walking from here to my car and I could phone, internationally. And it's so, technology has absolutely gone, exponentially beyond our understandings and imagination. But what that's done, instead of being more grateful to Allah, instead of recognizing, Ya Allah, look what we can do. We used to burn coal, for crying out loud. Now we have central heating. We used to be cold because the wind used to come through the windows, and now we have double glazing or triple glazing or whatever else that's around nowadays. We used to walk large distances just to go shopping or buy something or go visit people. Now, everybody's got a car or 2 or 3. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been very merciful to us. He's been very generous to us. He's given beyond our wildest imaginations. But has that brought us closer to Allah? Has that drawn us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or has it actually, made us feel more arrogant, more independent from Allah, thinking we have no need for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anymore, and we can move on? And sadly, it's much of the latter when it should be a lot of the former. So then they started to worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they were discontent with his bounty. He'd made their travel closer. He'd sorted everything out for them. And you see, for example, that rather than being content with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they showed discontent. How does this discontent play itself out? Well, I'm sorry to say we've run out of time. So I can't really tell you now how this discontent and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure and contentment has been lost, and what did he do in return? What is going to happen to these people? What's going to go on? Well, already I've given some ishara in the verses I've recited to you, but hopefully when you join me again, the next episode, I will be able to go into somewhat more greater detail in terms of what it is that actually happened to them, what issues that they went through, what they had to face for those 2 gardens, for those two gardens on the right hand side, for those two gardens on the left hand side to be changed into other types of those which did not bear the fantastic fruit, wasn't the fertile land as it was before, but it was quite the opposite. And it all started with the flood of the dam, the very same thing which was a source of their revenue, the very same thing which they had great belief in, the very same thing which was actually bringing them livelihood, was going to become their means of their destruction. I hope you can join me again next week, where I will be able to elaborate on that point and carry on with Siratu Khatam bin Nabiyyin. Jazakum Allah khairan, ahsan al jaza. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.